everyone! Wow, very, very happy to be here. HARDCHARLIE, the rapper psychotherapist here, speaking tonight on behalf of the Don't Block Your Blessings Festival, one of my favorite things to participate in every year. This festival is hosted by the incredible Arezu, who puts on this online festival of healers, artists, musicians, all in the name of his mother. And it's really, really exciting to be part of this evening. But boy, oh boy, do we have an interesting topic for tonight. Tonight, we are going to talk about how to absolutely annihilate depression. And this is going to be a really intense class. We're going to kind of go nice and deep, and we're going to figure out the building blocks of what depression is, and actually figure out first and foremost, we have to enunciate a couple facts, okay? We are responsible for our own mental health. This makes dealing with depression and anxiety and other mental health disorders really, really difficult. And let me further explain this. So, I come from a family of doctors. Like any good Jewish boy, I really only have 3 career options that are available to me, right? I could either be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. That's pretty much all I got, right? So, I come from a family of doctors. And in fact, I like to use this metaphor with my clients. That coming from a family of doctors really influences the way that I do therapy. Think about it like this, okay? So, let's say, God forbid, I get a gunshot wound in my shoulder, right? That's not the best day ever. But let's say, God forbid, I get a gunshot wound in my shoulder. I go to a medical doctor. What's that doctor going to do for me? He's going to pull the bullet out and he's going to fix me. But throughout that entire experience, I haven't had to do anything. The doctor fixes me. Now, as a psychotherapist, I cannot fix anyone. This is both the best and worst part of my job. It's the best part of my job because I'm not entirely responsible for my clients' outcomes, but it's the worst part of my job because I became a therapist to actually help people, right? So the metaphor that I use with my clients is, imagine if you, God forbid, have a gunshot wound. I can't pull the bullet out of you, but what I can do is teach you how to pull the bullet out of yourself. However, if you could imagine pulling a bullet out of yourself, it is a very gory and unpleasant experience that no one actually wants to go through. And hooray, that's what going to therapy is. That's what facing depression is. It is an unpleasant experience that no one wants to go through. No one has on their bucket list, hooray, I want to go talk to a shrink. Okay? No one wants to do this. This is unpleasant. This is difficult. However, we are responsible for our own mental health, and to make that even more complicated, unlike a medical doctor who could run all of these tests and images and things like this on you to try to figure out what's actually going on, as a therapist, I can't do that! I mean, we have, tests, but the tests are whatever, they're tests. Okay? We have to actually figure out what's going on. I'll tell you something. To start off the conversation on depression, let's talk about something depressing. There is a young woman who I never met, but who I cared for very, very deeply. She is a close friend of her. Her parents are close friends of mine. And unfortunately, earlier this year, she took her own life. Absolutely devastating. It was hands down one of the incidents of my life that really rocked me to my core. And what was interesting is that her parents allowed me to hear segments of her suicide note. And the thing that was most interesting about what she wrote is that she didn't know why she was the way she was. She couldn't figure out, why am I like this? Why do I feel this way? And what we have to understand, there's a magnificent passage in the Jewish oral law, in the Talmud. It says, in the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. In the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. These are also lyrics to a Modest Yahoo song. And basically, this song, what is kind of being referenced here is, think about it like this. From the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. The forest is an obstacle. Yet, the solution to getting through the obstacle lies within the obstacle itself. Meaning, we cannot fix a problem unless we know what the problem actually is. This is the biggest, most difficult part of overcoming depression. People don't know why the hell they're sad. It's very difficult for people to figure out, why am I like this? These are always, for many people, what's difficult clients, but actually, believe it or not, you'd be surprised. Depression is surprisingly easy to get better from. It's surprisingly easy to get better from. And I'm going to teach you the secret of how to do this tonight. I'm going to teach you how to actually recover from depression tonight in a very tangible, in a very workable, manageable way that might not even require medication. Really crazy, okay? So, with everything that I've said in mind, we have to know what is actually causing us to be depressed. And in order to do that, I have to first ask you all a question that is very difficult for many people to answer. We have to ask this question, what is sadness? What is sadness? Now, when I ask this question of people, very frequently they say to me, oh, well, it's the pit in my stomach, it's the lump in my throat, it's that sense of discomfort and dread that overwhelms me. That's what depression feels like. That's not what it actually is, meaning I'm asking the question, what is the function of depression? If we know how depression works and what it does, then we can fix it. But if we don't have a basic understanding of what sadness is and how it operates, there is no way for us to actually improve the condition that we're suffering from. So, in order to get an understanding of this question, what is depression? We have to hear about a story. I'm going to tell you a true story. It's a real story. It happened in Cambodia. And in order to answer this question, I'll tell you how it goes. So there was once a gentleman living in Cambodia who was a fourth-generation rice paddy farmer. It's a fourth-generation rice paddy farmer. This guy, first of all, I hope everyone here knows what a rice paddy is, okay? So a rice paddy, just like corn grows in dirt and everything like that, rice, just like it needs a ton of water in order to cook, it also needs a ton of water to grow. So a rice paddy is like an enclosed clay pit that there's about, I would say 8-9 inches of water, and the rice crop grows out of this water. So anyway, this gentleman is a fourth-generation rice paddy farmer. Literally from the time he could walk, he was trained to raise rice and cultivate rice. And this one day, he's walking around in his rice paddy. He steps on a landmine, and he blows off his leg. Oh my god. Okay, so he blows off his leg. This is a big deal. So what ends up happening is the other rice paddy farmers in the area, they see the explosion. They immediately rush in to assist him, and instantly he is, airlifted to a hospital. He's given all kinds of assistance to try to get through, this horrible trauma. And he goes into emergency surgery, and there are clean outs and everything, and then he's very swollen. And after the swelling goes down, what ends up occurring is he's then fitted for a prosthetic leg. This guy gets a prosthetic leg, and, it's a month of physical therapy ensues. He needs a bunch of physical therapy, and then they hear that he works in a rice paddy, and what ends up happening is they say, dude, you need a different prosthetic leg. So it's another month of physical therapy. Finally, after 3 months in the hospital, after this accident that he faced, it is now time for him to return back to work in the rice paddy. Now, here's the big question. If the last time you were in your place of work and your leg was blown off, how are you going to feel about returning to that place of work? It's going to be terrifying for you. In fact, when human beings face a trauma, we enter into a 3-part response. It's either fight, flight, or freeze. So here's a question for you. Which part of that response do you think is worse? Fight, flight, or freeze? What's the worst way of being? Well, the worst way of being is obviously freeze. Because if and think about it like this, it's the reason why childhood trauma is so terrible, because if I'm 5 years old, it's not like I could fight back, I'm this big. And if I'm 5, it's not like I could run away, I can't fly away, right? I can't grab a credit card and be like, screw you guys, I'm sleeping in a hotel tonight. Like, you can't do that, you're 5, okay? So obviously the worst part of the trauma response is the freeze response, okay? So what ends up happening is this gentleman leaves the hospital after his accident, comes back into the rice paddy that he was working, and he becomes extremely hopeless. He becomes frozen. It's actually interesting when we study Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, Depression, true depression, is referred to as something called Timtum Halev, a freezing of the heart. And what we have to understand is that this man legitimately is frozen. How is he frozen? How is he stuck? How is he unable to move? Because if you think about it, he has to earn a living. He only knows how to do one thing. So he's stuck because that one thing that he has to do is deeply traumatizing for him. So anyway, the gentleman must earn a living, so he's continuing to work in his rice paddy, and his family sees him declining and begins taking him to a bunch of different psychiatrists. And these psychiatrists, they give him, medication, and I want to just say right here, I am all for psychiatric medication. I have no problem with it whatsoever. I have this amazing way of doing therapy. Hold on to your seats for this one. Shit that works, let's do. Shit that doesn't work, let's not do. It's incredible, okay? If medication works for you, do medication. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing to be ashamed of with that. Okay, but we also have to understand, there's no such thing as a miracle pill. I ask my clients all the time, what do you think is more effective? Taking medication or actually doing psychotherapy? The answer, believe it or not, according to 1,500 studies, is that actually both combined lend to the best outcomes. Okay? So think about it. It makes sense. If I am counseling a person and yet their depression is so bad that they cannot even begin to, use the skills that I'm teaching them, obviously they need a little something to pick themselves up. Okay? But at the same time, if I give a person a miracle pill, you cannot give a patient a miracle pill and, expect them, hey, this is going to fix all your problems. You could give this guy in the rice paddy all the psychiatric medication on the face of the planet. It is never going to fix the fact that he is, basically being traumatized on a daily basis working there. So, nevertheless, what ends up occurring is this guy begins to get worse. Why is he getting worse on the psychiatric meds? Well, because let's just go over this, okay? Many people who have taken an antidepressant find themselves in this horrible feedback loop. So it's you take an antidepressant, you feel better, it wears off, you go back to the doctor, they change the prescription, they up the dosage, you feel better, it wears off, you go back to the doctor, and because he was putting all his eggs in the basket of taking a psych med, the fact that it wasn't working only furthered his depression and only increased his depression. So what ends up occurring is, as this guy is getting worse and worse, his family hears that there's a famous doctor flying into Cambodia from the United States, and they are determined to get their loved one an appointment with him. So anyway, the doctor is able to actually, this guy is able to meet with this famous doctor. He goes to the famous doctor, pours out his heart and soul, and the doctor says, I know exactly what you need. He pulls in the guy's family, and he says to them, I am writing your loved one a prescription for a cow. He says, what I want you to do is I want you to pool your resources. I want you to get this man a cow. Teach him how to use it to, make milk and cheese and dairy products, things like that. And let's see how that impacts his demeanor, mood, and presentation. So that's exactly what the family does. They, get this guy a cow. He starts, becoming a dairy farmer. And lo and behold, his depression stops. Incredible. That cow was an antidepressant. That's an amazing, incredible insight. Why is it that this man stopped being depressed? Well, it's very, very simple. Okay? He no longer had to be traumatized every single day working in a rice paddy that ultimately scared the daylights out of him. So, circling back to this first question that we asked before I told this story, what is sadness? Based on this story, now we have an answer. Sadness is the state we enter whenever one or more of our needs as human beings, or even really as animals too, whenever our needs are not being met, we get depressed. So, now that we know what the problem is, whenever a person is sad or depressed, it is because their needs are not getting met. If we know that, this also gives rise to the solution of how to fix depression, of how to actually make it better. Mind-blowing. This is incredible. All we have to do is we have to get the person to recognize his or her needs. And we have to get them pursuing those needs in order to get those needs met. If you get your needs met, you stop being depressed. Okay? But of course, this gives rise to another complicated situation. what happens if you have no idea what you need in order to be happy? So I'll let you in on, a secret, two interventions, one of which is a not so secret question that we ask our clients as therapists. So a very famous intervention that therapists do to try to help clients recognize what their needs are is we ask them, imagine if you woke up tomorrow and your life was perfect. There was a miracle that your life was just the way you wanted it to be. What would be different about it? Think about this question. If you woke up tomorrow and your life was just the way you wanted it to be, what would actually be different about it? And as we kind of break down what the differences are between this perfect world, this perfect life, and what your life is currently like, we could begin to recognize what needs are currently unaddressed. It's a pretty amazing intervention. So if I have a client say to me, well, something, if I woke up tomorrow and my life was perfect, I'd be working in a job that I actually enjoyed, that I felt like paid me fairly. Well, we can have an understanding that A, this person feels exploited by his job, and B, is probably lacking some type of direction, is lacking some way of growing and moving in life, So the first way of basically conquering our depression is recognizing that we need to get our needs met. And using this tool, this famous miracle question, it's a very easy way of enunciating what those missing needs actually are. Now, the other way of doing this is by using something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but this is like when you take Psych 101 in college, this is like one of the first things that are taught, okay? Why is this so important? It's interesting. I know many therapists who actually have a lot of anxiety about being therapists. And the anxiety is actually very logical. It's a very logical type of anxiety. Like, think about it like this, okay? As a therapist, I can have literally any problem in the world coming through my door. I have literally had a client who worked for the FBI and she was afraid that her house was being bugged. I have another guy who's questioning his gender identity. I have another person who's having marital issues, sexual issues, issues with, focus. I mean, you name it, it comes through my door. So how in the world can a therapist, or really anyone for that matter, have an idea of how to fix everyone's problems? Or at least give guidance in everyone's problems? And the answer is very simple. At the end of the day, what Maslow postulates, this theorist, is he says that every human being has the exact same needs. Every human being has the exact same needs. Very important piece of advice here. Okay? He actually arranges all of human needs into a hierarchy. It looks like a triangle, right? And if you can envision this triangle, it's divided into 5 different levels. So the lowest level on the triangle are physiological needs. Okay, we're talking like food, air, water, shelter, things like that. Above that are safety needs. On top of that are relational needs. On top of that are esteem needs. And then finally, at the very tip top, are self-actualization needs. Now, because this is a hierarchy, what that actually means is that we cannot reach higher order needs until lower order needs are met. So, for instance, if I have a homeless gentleman come into my office saying that he's having bad anxiety, it would kind of be ridiculous of me to, really work with him about his racing thoughts when this guy doesn't even have a bed to go home to. Okay? At the end of the day, if our bottom order needs, if our lower order needs are not being met, trying to work on higher order needs is kind of futile. It's ridiculous. Okay? So what we have to do is what I'll typically do with the client in overcoming depression is what we'll do is we will look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'll ask them, what level do you feel like your needs are most lacking in? And interestingly enough, most people don't necessarily get it right. Some people will say, I'm lacking in my relationships, maybe I don't have drive, maybe I don't have a goal in mind. Really, the needs that I think go most overlooked and are actually most catastrophic when neglected to a person's mental health are safety needs. Our safety needs. When I talk about safety, people immediately think about, bullets whizzing overhead and stuff like that. So we have to ask this question, what does it mean to be safe? What does it mean to be safe? So I like to ask my patients this question. Okay, have you ever been in a car with an unsafe driver? I certainly have. That's what college was for, right? Maybe this person was, God forbid, under the influence, or maybe they were just kind of not paying attention. They were on their cell phone doing their makeup, God knows what. Okay, but many of us have had that experience of being in a car with an unsafe driver. And I go through the following line of questions with them. I first ask them, and I'll ask this to you, is it safe to say that you were born in a hospital? Most people say yes. Is it safe to say that when you left that hospital, your parents took you home in a car, not in a rocket ship, not in a hovercraft, but in a car? Yes, also true. Is it safe to say that at your age, if you're old enough to be watching this right now, you've probably been in a car north of 10,000 times? Yeah, yeah. So if you've been in a car 10,000 times, then in your brain you have what psychologists call an IWM, an internal working model, which is basically a set of expectations that we possess that relate to any particular situation that we may be in. Okay, so like, for instance, I've had a very good example. If you've ever been on an airplane, right? Everyone's had this experience. You're on an airplane and there's that noise that's very unfamiliar to you. You've been on many airplanes before. You've never heard that noise and you're like, what the hell is going on? Is everything okay? I'm freaking out right now. At the end of the day, what safety is consistency and predictability. Most people struggling with depression, this is where they're lacking. They lack safety. They lack predictability. They lack consistency. And you have to understand, consistency and predictability are not sexy. They're not sexy. In fact, they kind of sound boring. But something very interesting. There's a magnificent commentary in the Zohar. This is like one of the key books of Kabbalah, one of the key books of Jewish mysticism. And in this text, it brings up the three forefathers, okay? The three forefathers of Judaism. It shouldn't be called the three fathers, but whatever. They're the forefathers of Judaism, even though there are three of them. So we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I'll give you just a very quick rundown of who these people were. So we have Abraham, who lived an extremely exciting life. From the time he was a child, he recognizes, no, idols cannot truly be God. He destroys his father's idol shop. His father gets very angry at him, brings him to King Nimrod. King Nimrod throws him in a pit of fire, but the fire doesn't burn him. In fact, he perceives the fire as just like daffodils and daisies, and he skips around in it. And then he comes out, and everyone is amazed that he is unscathed. And even as a child, he garners hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. And he talks to people that there is this one God who supersedes all the processes that we recognize in the world, that there is this higher entity, this higher God that controls absolutely everything. Abraham, goes through this incredible journey, and he's tested many, many times, and he meets this incredible wife, Sarah, and, she's abducted, and then he gets her back, and, they're greeted by angels who tell him, you're going to have a kid at 100 years old. Like, Abraham has, and then he nearly sacrifices his son. Abraham has a very exciting life. Abraham has a very exciting life, okay? So we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. We're actually going to now skip to Jacob. Let's look at Jacob. Jacob, also fascinating guy, okay? From the moment he's born, it's absolute mayhem. We have Jacob who kind of, steals his brother's blessing. Basically his father Isaac was pretty much blind at the time. His mother tells him, get this blessing from your father. He gets the blessing, but then his brother threatens to kill him. It's a whole to-do, and Jacob becomes a shepherd, and he then, with his, 4 wives, who's probably only 2 wives, it's a commentary thing, but he has a bunch of sons and daughters, and, his family sojourns to the desert, and while in the desert, his prized son, his favorite son, Joseph, is sold into slavery by the brothers, and then he's very depressed, where's my son? And then he's reunited with the son, and the Jews live happily ever after in Egypt until the whole slavery thing starts. So, Jacob is another one who lives this very exciting lifestyle. But what's interesting is the second forefather, so we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Isaac, we know very little about him, but the Zoharic text actually says that he's the greatest of them all. And this is what's interesting. This is really something special. So, first of all, the only things we really know about Isaac is that A, his father nearly sacrifices him. B, the only thing he really does in his life is he goes around and he uncovers the wells that his father had dug. So he's not even digging his own wells, he's just uncovering the wells that his father dug. Okay? But that's all he really does. He just continues his father's legacy. That's it. That's all we really know. We know very little about him. And yet, the Zohar, this, pinnacle Jewish text of mysticism, says that he's the holiest one. And there's an amazing commentary that shows this. What the commentary says is that God goes to Abraham and says to Abraham, Abraham, your people, the Jewish people, they're sinning. And Abraham says, okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? Punish them, whatever. Then God goes to Jacob and says, Jacob, your children, your people, Jewish people, they're sinning. Jacob's like, what do you want me to do about it? You do something about it. Then God goes to Isaac and says, Isaac, your Jewish children are sinning. And Isaac comes back with the ultimate spousal response that everyone's spouse has said to them at some point or another. What do you mean, your children? It's not your children, it's our children. The thing that makes Isaac so great is that even though he didn't have an exciting life, he was extremely consistent. He was very, very consistent. He executed to a T. He was predictable. He maintained consistency in his life. And even though safety is not sexy, it is extremely good for mental health. It is extremely good for success. If we think about what deems a person successful, okay, they need to be consistent in that which they do. Now, I could tell you something. Part of the reason why people get depressed is because they're not happy with the consistent things in their lives. The consistent things in their lives, A, either aren't very consistent at all, or B, they don't bring them much pleasure or joy. So the idea is, and this is one of our big take-homes, we need to get people to recognize their need for safety. We need to get people to recognize the importance of building consistency. There's a reason why I pray every day as a religious Jew. I pray every day because that keeps me grounded. I need that consistency. It doesn't matter if it's a good day, if it's a bad day, it doesn't matter to me. I still pray. And as a result of that consistency, when life does give me opportunity, does show me challenges where my needs aren't necessarily being met, at least I have certain habits I could fall back on to keep me sane through those moments in those points of insecurity. This is really, really powerful. This is very, very important. So what we have to recognize, okay, is that, A, if we want to conquer depression, the first step is we need to know what sadness is. Sadness is the state that we enter whenever our needs are not being met, okay? Secondly, we have to recognize that our sadness, our needs actually can be recognized either by asking ourselves the miracle question or by looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we have to take into consideration that all human beings have the exact same needs, okay? Now, the next thing we need to have an understanding about with depression is entirely environmentally based. I have never met a person in my life who is absolutely depressed for no goddamn reason, okay? I've never seen it before, okay? People are always depressed for a reason. Most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, if not more, okay? It's because there's something going on in their environment that isn't to their liking, that isn't meeting what their needs are. Okay, now, of course, if you have bipolar disorder, like manic depression, I mean, that right there is very biologically based, okay? But most depression that comes through my door is not. Most of the time, it's a loss. There's grief. There's, something not up to par, not up to standard. So the idea is, and what we have to kind of recognize is that we need to always be attuned to the fact that our sadness comes from somewhere. And these things, by the way, are within our control to fix. So a lot of people, they are in situations and they feel like, I have no autonomy, I'm stuck, I'm frozen. When in reality, all we have to do is make a change, but that's also a problem, okay? Because a depressed person already doesn't feel great about themselves. So what we have to do, this is the issue. They already don't feel great about themselves, but then what? They recognize the fact they have to do the scariest thing in the world to human beings. They have to make a change. And change is a really, really, really scary thing, especially when you're not in a great state. But the benefit of making that change, the benefit of pulling that bullet out, is you get to be rewarded with mental health. You get to be rewarded with a clear head. And if you think about it, actually, I teach my patients all the time, the greatest gift we can really give a person is peace of mind. The best way of giving ourselves self-love is to allow ourselves to have peace of mind. So we have to recognize that when we are depressed, it is a response to a dysfunctional environment. Okay? We have to recognize that all behavior has a function. Sometimes that dysfunction is unhealthy. But now we have to ask this question, and this is one of the kind of where I wanted to pivot this talk for the next few minutes. There's a very good way. I'm not going to necessarily say it's easy, but there's another excellent way of kind of overcoming depression that we have to take into consideration. Okay? We get sad because our needs are lacking, right? That's why we get sad. But we also have to understand, and one of the actually big things that people struggle with in this is that they ask the question, why are my needs lacking? Why is this happening to me? Right? So we have to ask this question, why do we have to be sad to begin with? What's the point of sadness? Why should we ever have to enter a state where our needs are not fully met? Right? So to answer this question, we have to take a couple things into consideration here. And some of these things are difficult to understand. Anytime we find ourselves in a situation where our needs are not being met, when we're in a state of discomfort, that discomfort is potentially a very positive thing. It's a very positive thing. Okay? Now, it's interesting because most people run away from discomfort. Most people don't want anything to do with discomfort. But what we have to understand is that, discomfort is also a major way that we grow. We need discomfort. Discomfort is actually a very powerful force for many of us. In fact, all of us. What am I saying, many of us? All of us need to be uncomfortable because in a state of comfort, unfortunately, there's no motive to make change. That's the thing. And as human beings, we have to change. In fact, one of the ways that we determine whether or not something is alive or not alive, God forbid, is whether or not they have the capacity for change and growth. If those things don't exist, if that capacity is not there, then that person is no longer alive. So we have to kind of recognize that every single person has motivation behind their behaviors. Every single behavior that we engage in has a motivation. This is a major, major thing to understand in conquering our depression. So I'll tell you one more very interesting story about conquering depression, conquering trauma, things like that, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So there is a famous doctor, and this doctor's name is Dr. Vincent Felitti. Dr. Vincent Felitti was, I believe, just like a general practitioner, and pretty much what was going on, he was noticing that many, many people who were coming to his clinic were morbidly obese. They were extremely overweight. And unfortunately, this, being overweight caused them to have a lot of medical issues, right? Unfortunately, being overweight does lead to a lot of problems, heart disease, things like that. And he was seeing that, because these people were so heavyset, in fact, they were facing those issues. So Dr. Felitti gets this really crazy idea. He was like, what would happen if we just stopped allowing people to eat? Like, we just kept these people alive, using all kinds of supplements and giving them water, maybe a small meal at the end of the day. But, like, what would happen if we did that? So whenever a therapist or psychologist wants to run some kind of study, they have to work with what's called an IRB, an internal review board. So he brings this idea before an internal review board, and they give him the okay. They just have to go through a lot of monitoring and stuff like that. So what ends up occurring is he does it. He recruits 50 people who are all over the weight of 300 pounds. And he begins giving them the supplements and everything, and they start shedding weight like no one's business. It is just flying off of them, right? You have people who in a 6-month period are losing literally 75 pounds, 100 pounds, like unbelievable amounts of weight. And anyway, what ends up happening is there's this one young woman that each one of these participants, they're having like bi-weekly weigh-ins and things like that, or monthly weigh-ins later on in the experiment. And there's this one young lady, it's about 9 months into the experiment, and pretty much what happens is she comes to her monthly weigh-in, and they come to recognize that she had regained 50 pounds in 1 month. Now, for most people, if you were to gain 50 pounds in a month, that would kill you. So the fact that she did this, I mean, if you even think about what it takes to gain 50 pounds in a month, it's pretty insane. I mean, I'm pretty sure 1 pound is well over 1,000 calories. And given the fact that, naturally we burn calories even just sitting still, to eat an extra 1,000 calories multiple times a day, because there are only 30 days or 31 days in a month, to gain 50 pounds, I mean, that is a tremendous amount of food to gorge yourself with. So Dr. Felitti meets with this woman and asks her, dude, like, what happened? And that's clearly how Dr. Felitti speaks. He's like, dude, what happened, right? Dude is the way to go. So he goes to this woman and asks, what happened to you? And the lady basically says, actually, you know what? I went to a bar, and for the first time practically in her life, there was a guy who was hitting on her. Now, I can't say that it was anything like flagrantly sexual or inappropriate. There was this guy who was sitting on her, and she had a pretty good understanding of what, his expectations were. And after this experience, she immediately freaked out and began gorging herself. So Dr. Felitti was very curious by this, and he asks her, it's interesting, when did you realize that food was a real problem for you? And she said, well, when I was 12. And Dr. Felitti is like, okay, so did anything happen to you before you were 12? Maybe you were like 10 or 11, that might have prompted this. And she said, well, now that you put it like that, when I was 12, that was when my grandfather started molesting me. Dr. Felitti came to recognize that over half of the people involved in his study, in fact, had really serious sexual abuse histories. So much so that, this kind of prompted him to recognize that at the end of the day, when we look at an obese person, we think, oh, they're lazy, they're irresponsible, they're not taking care of themselves. Or maybe we're a little more compassionate, we say they have a health issue. But very few people think of behavior as symptomatic of emotions. What this lady was doing is she was keeping herself overweight to ensure that she was overlooked. She was using her eating as a way of protecting herself. Sometimes what happens is we use depression as a way of protecting ourselves from the intense changes that we have to make in the future. Okay? Change is very intimidating. So sometimes what we'll do to avoid, the things that, are too intimidating for us to overcome, what we'll do is we'll frequently, engage in depressive behaviors. We'll stay all day in our rooms, in our beds. We'll eat too much, we'll drink too much, we'll take too much medication, we'll buy too much, we'll have too much sex. These are all things that people do as a means of avoiding the need to make change in their own depression. So the idea is we have to kind of recognize these behaviors. We have to recognize when I am depressed and when I'm trying to, make myself better, but I'm stuck. Okay, we have to recognize that these self-soothing behaviors are ultimately unfruitful. And I guess we'll kind of conclude with the conversation on how to begin, making ourselves feel better. And I think this is kind of a good segue. There is a very big difference between self-soothing and self-care. There is a very big difference between selfishness and self-care. These things people actually really struggle with. So think about it like this. Okay? What is a self-soothing behavior? A self-soothing behavior is any behavior that we engage in that brings us back to homeostasis. It gets us, I had a stressful day, whatever, so I come home, I open up my freezer, I eat a cup of ice cream. Very good self-soothing, right? I had a rough day, I'm really burnt out, let me spend some time on social media scrolling. Okay? Something very cathartic about that, something very freeing and pleasurable about that. Okay, makes sense. So what we have to kind of recognize, and this is a big deal, is that the problem with self-soothing behaviors is that they can only return us to homeostasis, and if we remain at homeostasis for too long, we in fact dip below homeostasis. In fact, these self-soothing behaviors could even dysregulate us. Okay? And if you think about it, a self-soothing behavior is anything that you do that could potentially make you feel guilty afterwards. So, like, for instance, it's one thing to eat a cup of ice cream. It's another thing to eat the entire fucking gallon. Okay? It's one thing to, spend, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on social media. It's another thing to spend 4 hours. Okay? Any time that we do a self-soothing behavior in excess, we're going to start feeling guilty about it. Now, let's contrast this with a self-care behavior. What self-care is instead of returning us to homeostasis, what self-care does is it actually heightens our homeostasis, meaning a self-care behavior allows us to actually tolerate more than what we'd be able to tolerate had we not engaged in that behavior, right? So one of the things that I love doing, it's just become like a very fun hobby for me. I really, really enjoy rock collecting. I call it dirt therapy. When I was a kid, I used to collect rocks. Nowadays, I'm older, so I'll go online, I'll research old mines, I'll break into them and find some really cool stuff, while risking my life sometimes because it's really sketchy and dangerous. And then I ask myself, am I really putting my life on the line in order to get a rock right now? Very questionable choices indeed. But the thing is that I love that. For me, when I go out and I slow down and I'm searching for something and then I'm rewarded with what it is that I'm looking for, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good about myself. It gives me a sense of accomplishment, and it allows me to relax a little bit and step away from my office and my work and things like that. Now, the thing that's interesting is, if it's obviously, it could be something very selfish of me to go do. Instead of taking care of people or taking care of my family, I'm going to go off and do my own thing. So this begs the question, what is the difference between selfishness and self-care? Very good question. Here's the difference. It's intent. When I engage in a self-care behavior, my intent is to more deeply connect with the people who are in my life. Whereas if I'm engaging in a selfish behavior, what I'm trying to do is distance myself from the people in my life. I'm trying to pull myself away from them. The goal is not for additional connection, it's for less connection. Okay? So once I heighten that level of homeostasis that we were talking about, I should be better able to tolerate my wife, my kids, my patients, my friends, whoever else in my social system. Okay? So at the end of the day, what we have to recognize is this. A, if you are depressed, what you must do is you have to figure out what are your needs. And by the way, even if you cannot achieve your needs, the very pursuit of your needs is going to make you feel better. Even pursuing your needs, knowing full well, I'm working towards the goal of attaining my needs, that is going to make you feel better. It is going to improve your current situation. That is very, very important, okay? Secondly, how you figure out your needs is either by asking yourself the miracle question, if you woke up tomorrow and your life was perfect, what would be different about it? Or what you could do is look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and see where you're lacking. Make sure you consider safety. Okay? Safety is very frequently that need that we're talking about and that people neglect. And remember what safety is. Safety is consistency and predictability. When we don't have that to the extent that we need, we become very dysregulated. Okay? And then what we also have to consider is we have to consider the things that inhibit our capacity to change. We have to recognize that some of these behaviors that we engage in to self-soothe that inhibit our ability to change are there simply because the notion of change also seems uncomfortable to us, and in a depressed state, it almost seems impossible. But unfortunately, like I said at the very beginning, we are responsible for improving our own mental health, no one else. We have to do the work. We have to face our discomfort. And to be totally honest with you, discomfort is an excellent, excellent teacher. It's an excellent teacher. And if we are brave enough to face our discomfort, especially in a depressed state, facing that discomfort will often reveal within a person the strength that they need to further overcome other additional challenges in their lives. So guys, I'm hoping that tonight's talk taught you something. I'm hoping that you could use some of these skills and consider and just kind of frame depression in this manner. Anytime you get depressed, or anytime one of your friends is depressed, all you have to do is you have to ask, what do I need? What do they need? If you get an understanding of where your life is lacking, and you then pursue a way to achieve what is lacking, you're going to feel better about yourself. Depression is not a chemical imbalance in your brain. I am friends with legitimately one of the best neurosurgeons in the United States. Okay, and I ask him all the time, what does a properly chemically balanced brain look like? He has no idea. Okay, there's no such thing as a properly chemically balanced brain. No one knows what that looks like. Okay, you don't have depression because of a chemical imbalance. Okay, you have depression because of an imbalance in your life and your environment. If you find a way to get your needs met, you're not going to be sad anymore. You're going to overcome this. You're going to get stronger. Everything is going to be okay. So it's a huge pleasure speaking with you. Please check out the other presenters at don'tblockyourblessings.org. Big ups to my man, Arezu. He is the man. Thank you so much for putting this on and giving me this wonderful venue to speak in. I would also tell you, if you like anything that I've said tonight, please check out my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Charles Goldberg LPC. You can check out my music page. I am also a professional rapper. I am the rapper psychotherapist. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Hey, gotta make mom proud somehow. That is HARDCHARLIE.com. And guys, a huge pleasure. Take care of yourselves, and good luck with everything.